to get you on a slow boat to China. All to myself, all alone.
Friday night was bath night. The oval tin bath would be brought in from where it hung on a nail on the backyard wall and placed in front of the fire on the rag rug made by my mother from scraps of old clothes. Kettles and saucepans of water would be put on the slab, which most people now call a Cornish range, to boil. The slab was the hub of the living room. It provided warmth from the small fire with 3 iron grills in front of it, as well as heating the oven, where my mother baked the most fantastic pasties imaginable on a Thursday, as well as pilchards, slowly baked for days in a marinade of vinegar, butter, peppercorns and bay leaves, so that even the bones were edible. Later on, we had a gas cooker installed in the back kitchen, but my mother's pasties were never the same. When the water was almost boiling, my brother Malcolm, who was 8 years older than me, and was considered the man of the house in the wartime absence of my father, would pour it into the bath, cooling it down with cold water as necessary. Like most kids of 4 or 5, I hated the idea of bath night, but once I was submerged in the warm water with a bar of green fairy soap, I would soak for hours until my skin was parboiled, as my mum used to say, playing with boats that Malcolm had made for me. Malcolm's favourite trick was to say, "Is that someone knocking?" He would go out into the passage, open the front door and loudly say, "Oh, hello, Mrs. Davy, come in," and fall about laughing at my howls of protest. But this particular Friday, there really was a very loud, authoritative knock on the front door, and when Malcolm answered it, I heard him mumble, "Yeah, well, I suppose you'd better come in." A few seconds later, the living room door opened and a huge policeman came into the room, making me realize how small our living room was. He seemed to fill the room. "Oh, my blessed God," said my mother. "What have you been up to now, Malcolm?" Malcolm hung his head sheepishly, and I felt guilty because the previous week Louis and Bobby and I had pinched some ploughshares from the yard of E. Mitchell and Sons agricultural merchants at the bottom of Liskinnick Street. Goblin told us that the cops had been round his house accusing him of doing it. "It's all right, Mrs. White," said the policeman. "I've just come around about young Ralph Delabatouche." "Oh, aye," said my mother. "They're sad, aye. A real tragedy. That poor Mrs. Delabatouche. How she must be feeling." "I just want to ask young Malcolm here a few questions, if that's all right." "Hello, Nipper. Having a bath, are you?" he said to me, ruffling my hair. I said nothing, but pulled the wooden boat between my legs to cover my embarrassment. "Now then, Malcolm, tell me everything that happened." The policeman produced a black notebook and pencil, licking the end of the pencil. "Well, we went down the rocks, and we saw his body lying on the rocks, and it was all twisted up like, and he was all pale, sort of green," said Malcolm in a rush. "Now hang on, said the policeman. "Let's start at the beginning. Do you know how we got there? You've been playing down there. You know you're not supposed to play down the Eastern Rocks, don't he? You know that beach is mined, don't he?" "It's all right, Malk," said my mother, putting her arm around Malcolm protectively. "I'm here. Just tell him everything. And you, young man, you go a bit easy on him. Can't you see he's upset?" "Well, just doing my job, missus. Now then, boy. Apparently, he had got hold of an airman's life raft. Is that right?" "Yeah. Well, we found this life raft washed up on the rocks, see? And we took it over to the harbour to see if it was still working. But it was only half blown up, like, and then Ralph got in and started paddling with his hands, and before we knew it, he had floated out of the harbour, and the wind blew him right round Albert Pier, and we lost sight of him. So we all ran back to Eastern Rocks, and we could see the life raft floating round where the blood had come out from the slaughterhouse. But Ralph wasn't in it. And then about a half hour later, we saw his body washed up on the rocks, and it was all mangled up like, and it wasn't moving, and it was all pale like, sort of green. I could see that Malcolm was getting upset, and I started to cry. There, said my mum. It's all right, love, it's all right. The water's cold in my bath, I sobbed. Yeah, well, yeah, I think that's about all now, missus. Well, thank you, Malcolm, you've been very helpful. Sorry if, I upset you like, but you boys mustn't go playing down the eastern beach. It's very dangerous. You know there's a war on. He put on his helmet and left the room. My mum lifted me from the bath, wrapped me in a warm towel and started rubbing me, a bit roughly, I thought. I was going to ask her to stop, but when I looked at her face, I could see tears rolling down her cheeks. Malcolm just sat on a chair, staring into space. I thought he was very brave, and he was my hero and he looked after me. But I thought it better to ask him to make me a paper plane some other time.